Have you ever wondered what it truly takes to seek political asylum? What the immigration process really looks like for political asylees, or what life is like inside a US detention center? Welcome to Immigrant Conversations, the podcast that delves into the depth of immigrant journeys. We tell the untold stories of resilience, determination, and triumph, while shedding light on the harsh realities of migration. I'm your host, Mehran, public speaking and storytelling coach, and this is episode number 60. In this episode, I speak with Mohammed Diouf, who fled political persecutions in Cameroon and survived a harrowing journey through dense jungles, across borders, and into American detention centers. He's now a life coach, an immigration and wellness advocate, and supports others who are looking to tell their stories. So go ahead, grab your cup of tea, and join me in another episode of Immigrant Conversations. From what I know, you're from Cameroon and has fled persecutions. Can you tell us about your migration journey and all the countries you lived along the way before coming to the States?
Yeah, hi, Marianne. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and share part of my immigration story. My journey was long and difficult. So before going into the journey, maybe I should give a little bit background as to why I left the country and what motivated me to leave. So like you said, I was born and raised in Cameroon, and um I don't know if you know much about Cameroon, but we say to be a democratic country, but in reality it's not. And from a very young age I was able to observe that disparity and the gap that existed within our society. However, I was very fortunate to have parents that could afford education, and they sheltered us from a lot of the things that was happening in the country. And because of that, I was highly motivated to do something for my country, and I went to law school. And after my law studies that I didn't complete it because I had to fled, I saw some hard reality as to how politics is handling is managed in some African countries. But moving fast forward, I had to flee my country in a rush, and I ended up in Ecuador. That was the first country I landed. I knew nobody in Ecuador. I didn't speak any Spanish, and I was all alone. However, I knew that I had to survive, and I was very grateful that I was already out of the very perilous situation that I was back home, because I was arrested and detained for more than a week. So I was in Ecuador, and then I had to find my way to the US, because I knew at the time that the US is the only country that could provide me with the security and protection that I needed at the time. So I took the very dangerous journey leaving from Ecuador to reach the US. And so I left Ecuador, went into Colombia, and that was kind of the longest and most dangerous part of my journey, the forest between Panama and Colombia, because the other countries were, I would say, relatively not that difficult to travel, because we would go by bus, but occasionally you get harassed by police and different things. But however, you have a smooth journey. But the most dangerous part was the uh, forest between Panama and Colombia, called the Darien Gap. I spent 3 days and a half in that forest. We got lost. I saw a lot of people dying. I I myself at a certain point was almost gave up, because I was exhausted, walking for 3 days without food, without supplies or medications. And in the forest you have coyotes, you have wild animals, you have land like just falling and like different things. It's like everything is just there to kill you. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. But I was very, very lucky to come out of there.
How many of you were escaping together? Was it you alone, or can you give us a little more context?
Yeah, so I left my country alone, but I met a few other like migrants in Ecuador, and I was also like the way like life worked in like mysterious way. I had an extended cousin who was fleeing from the Anglophone war in the western side of our country, which is like very far away from where I was born and raised. And we met in Ecuador, so we made some of like the journey together. And there were like occasionally like very like small groups of like people, but never in like large numbers.
Mm.
It
What
was
kept you alive or hopeful during those difficult days?
what kept me alive. I would say what kept me alive is like the unknown, not knowing what was in front. And also, this is something that I'm so grateful to my parents. So back home, even though we had all these like privileges and advantage in my home country, my parents always made sure that sometimes they would send also like the village, or they would send also like places in the country where we have like less access to technology and like different like things. And all of those skills came very handy. Like I found like myself in those kind of like similar environment where I have nothing but myself to rely on to survive. And I think tapping into those like sources from like back home helped me to find like a path forward. And I also have this mindset of never giving up no matter what, because I really cherish the human experience, and I believe like the occurrence of our life on earth is very rare, and I'll do everything to protect it. So those were those two things that motivated me to move forward.
Mm. I I wanted to know, when did you find out that your life or your political involvement can put your life in danger? Can you tell us about that moment and what happened there?
It was during the presidential election in Cameroon. So in 2019, the political party that I was part of, called CRM, Movement for the Renaissance of Cameroon Black People, we did a huge campaign in Cameroon where we went into all the nooks and crannies and reminded people of who is the real like holder of like democracy, right? Who really has like the power, because um the political situation in my country is very messy. Just to give you like a perspective, we're having like the same president since 1989. like don't like quote me like on the date, but it's been a long time since I was born. We've been having a single president, and I cannot tell you what had like happened in the country. But back to the story. So during the presidential election, after we won and were denied like the election, we launched a movement of like peaceful disobedience, where thousands of Cameroonians came out in the street to protest for their rights. And that was something that was like never seen like before. And it only like happened once in our history, and it was a long time ago. So most of our political leaders were arrested, and they were
Mm.
supposed to be judged in the military court. So we went out to protest. And while I was there protesting, I got literally kidnapped by police like officers in who were dressed in civilian. I was about to board in the taxi to go to the university, because at the time I was still pursuing my law degree in the University of Soa. So I got kidnapped, and for more than a week, my family had no idea where I was. I had no idea where I was either. And that was some of this most scariest moment in my life, because detention in my country is not fun. It's a very nasty, dark, infested place that is overcrowded with very limited access. I mean, you have no light or basic medical attention. Yeah.
Well, you went to Ecuador. and then to Panama and Colombia. And then what happened?
So actually, like a good recollection, I went through all the countries in Southern America, starting from Ecuador. I cannot just like recall exactly on the top of my mind, but I went to each country from like Ecuador to like Panama to Colombia to Nicaragua to like all those countries. And that was I used to read about racism only in history books. But for the first time in my life, I witnessed like those things like firsthand, seeing like, people treating you differently just because of the color of your skin. That is something that, in Africa, I mean, we don't have those kind of issues. So that was like one. And then the other thing, like I had to like adapt really fast. I had to like learn. I mean, today I speak Spanish, which is something that there's nobody in my family or in my country. I mean, like Spanish is not like a language spoken, but I had to like adapt really fast and learn a new language to be able to like communicate with the locals and asking information of where to go because I was alone. I didn't had like no guidance. I didn't even know where I was going, so I had to like adapt really, really fast. I leave from Ecuador, travel all those countries, and then I'm stuck at the US Mexican border. That was 2019. And the reason why I was stuck there was because at the time, the administration that was in power had launched the Migrant Protection Protocol that made thousands and thousands of like refugees and asylum seekers stuck at the US Mexican border. Now, I mean, I would love to believe that, like, our legislator and like political like leaders, they always put those like laws with very good intentions. However, what that law did at the time was really putting a lot of people into harm, me included. For for example, in Mexico, like at the border, it was routine for police or even individuals to kidnap like people or like harass and ask for ransom. They would work in areas where like they know that refugees and asylum like seekers are. They would arbitrarily detain you and then ask for money to release you, and that can happen many times, which created like an atmosphere of fear where for me personally, I had to stay in my hotel room for like a long time, only come out for food. But then came the time where I had to work. I had to like, find for like odd jobs. So it was kind of very, very scary to put yourself out there to even look for information because the atmosphere was like very critical. And the only reason why I was like, stranded in Mexico at the time was because of that rule, the migrant protection like protocol, which did nothing but protecting any migrant. I know of a personal like story of a guy who, before like that rule was put in place, he was supposed to cross to the U.S. Side, like requesting from asylum from a Latin country, and he was fleeing really like a dangerous situation. And he went at the border, and they told him like he had to wait in Mexico. That same guy went back to the border with his skull open. They literally chop his head with it. Like I don't know how he didn't die, and I'm sure there will be some news like of that like online. But this same because we were almost every day going at the border, we would go at Chaparral and then get like updates and see like what's happening. And this guy, and that is when they admitted him in. And I was like, so you have to be nearly dead for like people to like, it was kind of like very like dangerous.
Wow. How long you were in that situation?
2 months and 3 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, I had to find like odd jobs. I was very, very like fortunate to find like a job at this company called Agua El Ruby in Baja, like California, in Baja, like Tijuana, like they call it like Baja, California, because when I was already in Mexico, my Spanish was quite good. Like, I mean, ahora like yo puedo hablar español como un latino, which is like funny. Yeah, so like I had like it was easier for me to like integrate with like the locals and like communicate. And I'm very proud that through me, like I helped like a lot of like other migrants find like job opportunities while waiting to cross to the US side. And there was also this amazing nonprofit organization called El Ocho Lado, and some like they had this workshop and places where migrants could go and have free food, get free legal advice, and any other information. And I became like very close with them to the point where, because I speak multiple languages, I speak French, I speak Spanish, I read and write in Arabic. So sometimes like I would help them translate ideas or like communicate with like the locals, because there was huge misinformation happening in the area of what the rule means, what does it mean for like new like arrivals. So that was a little bit about like the atmosphere in the area, mix of danger and hope.
Yeah. So what happened? When did you finally find out that you could come to the States? And how was that like?
Again, I was very, very fortunate. While I was going to El Ocho Lado and assisting like others, that is where I met the person who is today my godmother. And she came there to like volunteer, and for some reason we had a connection, maybe because I reminded her of her kids, and she reached out to me and she shared her information. I was very skeptical because I was like scared of like people there, but she was a blessing in the sky, because like a week like after, she sends a lawyer from the US to come and meet me in Mexico and start my immigration case. And it went like from there, that like the lawyer took my case, and then I was able to like cross to the US. I spent 2 months in Otay Mesa detention center, which was horrible. And then I was released the day of Thanksgiving, and I celebrated Thanksgiving in Palo Alto with my godmother and her family.
Well, can you tell us about the detention centers and how was life in those environments?
The detention center. I mean, the detention center is like a horrible place, like horrible. The way in which they even bring migrant there in the first place is inhuman. So they would chain you from your, like your hand to your feet, and a chain that goes like down. And the same goes for women, children, like male, like there's no exception. And then it's jail. It's like, I mean, so back home in Cameroon, when I was like arrested, I was only in a cell. So I've never ever in my life experienced like a real jail. But for the first time, I experienced jail in the US, because we were just like separated by different blocks where like we know real inmates, and we had blue shirts and they had like orange like shirts, and we had the exact same treatment as inmates. Like, you wake up at 5 a.m. for like shower time, you will be locked in your cell for a couple of hours. They only like for the end, or like almost like the whole day, they only like daylight that you see is from like the backyard of like the block. And the food there was horrible. Like, when I came out of there, I developed this kind of like disgusting for like burritos, because they were feeding us like burritos almost every single day. It was it's not a fun place to be, I would say. Yeah.
And you mentioned like even children were treated the same because when I look at the pictures of detention centers, it's just, rooms with glass walls, as someone who lives in the States and hears about detention centers currently being used, I personally have no idea what they look like. So thank you for taking us to the detention center that you lived in. What was the experience of the children? Were they also treated the same? Were they also in cells? Were they with their parents? Were they separated? How
So
about that?
like I don't have like full information, because it's not like they would leave us one like wonder like around the detention, but in the cell, I didn't witness like females or like children. However, in there's this that they call like the cold house, like the facility that they take you before going to the cell. That is where I witnessed like children's and like women and like stuff. So like the cold house is the first area where they detain like people. What I was observing is like they would keep like mothers and children in the same like block, like together, and then but they would separate like the father. However, they also had kind of like accommodation for like large families, but I've never been there because I was alone, so I don't really know exactly what was happening in there. And for some reason, they had kind of like different isolation blocks for transgenders, and like it was kind of like separated and like segregated. And we slept with, I don't know if you've seen like these Rambo movies where like soldiers wrap themselves with aluminum, kind of like it looks like
Yes.
an aluminum like paper. That is the only thing you're given to sleep on in the cold house, and it's called the cold house for a reason, because it is extremely cold. Imagine somebody coming from a tropical country or a country where, like, they literally put you in conditions for you to give up. And some people gave up. You had people who were like, I'd rather go and die, because imagine coming through persecution and you have succeeded to like go through all this dangerous thing. You've escaped like the danger in the forest, you've escaped like cartels in Mexico, and now you're in the US where you think you'll be safe, and the first thing that happens to you is courthouse and detention. So some people did give up and they were like, I can't do this anymore.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, what misconceptions do you think people have about the political asylum process that you wish more people understood?
Before even like going into like the narrow of like that, I would try to like broaden a little bit about the political like horizon in like general. We're thinking like a lot of people just, I don't know, you just like hear things or see things in like mainstream media without doing like the due process of like verifying if the information is like real. And it is scary because when I hear, for example, that migrants are stealing jobs of like people in the country, I'm like, what are you talking about? First of all, to work in the US as an immigrant, you have to wait at least 190 days and go through a process of obtaining a work authorization. And after that, you have to go through the process of applying to like get a job. And I mean, we living in a country of law, and it's not like people just you can't just work like that. And in the migrant community, people are actually afraid of working without a working authorization, because that is like a clear path for for deportation. Because as an immigrant, if you're caught working without the proper like paperwork, you'll be deported immediately. So that is like one. And then the other thing that people don't understand, like that I feel like people don't understand, like sometimes nobody chooses to be a refugee. Like nobody chooses to like just leave their country and come to the US. I don't know, like people think that there's like the quality of life in the US. I said it to my American friends like every day. Yes, we have like security in the US. Yes, we have like a lot of things, but the quality of life in the US is not as great as compared to like other countries. So you need to understand that sometimes people leaving everything like behind is really to save their lives. Because if we was to talk of like, oh, we coming to the US because the US is this great super place with all of these things, yes, but it's not always the case. These are some misconceptions that I think is kind of like wandering like out there.
Mm, absolutely. Now, what do you think are some misconceptions about the political asylum process?
A political like asylee is somebody who is fleeing his country because of like political persecution from like their home country, right? And for someone to even qualify as a political asylee, you need extensive, like the burden of proof is on you. which means you need to like bring like extensive like proofs to be able to even like start like a case. And in many cases, people who don't have access to like the data, most asylum cases in the US are denied, are not even like accepted. So I don't even like, it's
How
kind
much
of
document did you have to provide?
I had to bring like country reports. I had to bring like pictures of, it was it was an excruciating process where you have to like first of all you have to recall to the best of your memory what has happened to you in the past. Now, somebody fleeing from political persecution, in my case, for example, I didn't want to I didn't want to have to remember all of those things that I went through. However, you have to, because if you don't reach like the threshold for for the burden of proof, you would not be granted. So you have to gather like country reports, you have to gather like evidence of like past persecution, you have to like gather affidavits of like family or friends who would corroborate your story. You have to be able to stand in front of a judge. And for most people, even which is not like English is not their first language, have to b- recall all of those very, very sad times in your life. And there's one thing about political uh, asylum in like a whole, where it's like your say and you're being judged based on your credibility, which means even if you have sometimes all of the proof and all of the evidences, it a judge might find you not credible based on inconsistency on your like what your like your story and like stuff. And that can be like the end of your story and your return to a place where you risk everything to get out of.
Mm. How has your approach to advocacy evolved from your work in your home country to the nonprofit work?
So one thing that I remind like myself like every day is say the truth and the truth shall set you free, right? And not be afraid of bringing the true version of who you are as a person, and not let the political like atmosphere of what is happening around like deter you from like the mission. Because coming back to like the human like experience, I really, really, really like cherish like human life, and believe like everything should be done like to protect human life. And in those moments, I feel like even though we shouldn't be afraid of pursuing like our ideas and like our ideal, we should also like be careful, because being an advocate is a very hard like task, because you have to manage your personal life, you have to manage the fear of like what is happening like now, like these days, being cancer and like all of the scary thing like happening like around. So my approach is like just staying true to myself and my core values while adapting to the political atmosphere and what is happening in my surrounding.
Hmm. What are some values that you learned from your culture that you believe can make our world a better place?
So, value from my culture, I would say endurance. Like, uh, not be afraid of tackling difficult like things, and just be a very like hard like worker. However, when I moved to the US, I learned that endurance is a great like quality, and helps forge a great society. However, adaptability and also like seeking for help when it's like necessary is something that is very important, because we all need each other at a certain moment like in time. and I think those are like important like values.
Mm. Are there certain things from your culture that you decided to unlearn because they weren't serving you in the States?
Uh, yeah, how to know. that's that's a I had to unlearn a lot of things. Going back to like endurance, right? So back in my culture, we are taught to be tough. We are taught to be like, in the Latino like culture, like macho con duro, like, never show like tears, always been like a man. I had to like unlearn that because sometimes you really need to like extend like that hand and being like, being able to like adapt to like your environment. So I've really like had to unlearn that thinking that I can handle everything by myself. And I also learned how to cry when it's necessary.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. I used to suppress a lot of feelings inside, thinking that like, I don't have to share what is like happening inside, or sometimes I have like crazy thoughts. But today, like therapy and having a partner that I love and who loves me, like, showed me like a different perspective of life.
Mm. Any parting tips for our audience? Something that you want to leave them with?
Actually, yes. No, not. I'm gonna end with this quote. So, my partner is actually like right now in Poland with her family, and they went to visit this museum. It's called the Auschwitz. I think it's Auschwitz. And she sent me this picture of this amazing quote by George Santayana. And the quote reads, "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it."
Mm.
And I really hope that we don't forget, like, about our history, and we can tap into that to find, like, the resources that we need to tackle our present moment and the future.
Thank you, Mohammed, for this time. I truly enjoyed listening to your story. Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing it with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
According to recent studies, over 59,000 individuals are currently held in U.S. detention centers. Over 100,000 fully vetted refugees remain stranded, living in limbo due to restrictive immigration bans, many of them losing hope as they wait for their chance to start their life. These are not just statistics. They are people like Mohammed who fled their countries in search of a better life. These are heartbreaking moments, especially for us living in the US, valuing kindness and support, especially for people who need our help. If this episode moved you, please share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. And if you are on your own immigration journey, remember, you're not alone. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And so does your hope. And this podcast is there to support you. Until the next episode of Immigrant Conversations, stay safe, stay strong, and keep sharing your story.